Hello. Welcome to Conversations: A Journey. I'm Ellis Rice, and today we have our guest, Ms. Claytee White. She's a historian and a great member of this community, and she has agreed to have a conversation with us today. Welcome, Claytee.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
So, Claytee, we're going to begin with what we call our origin story.
Okay.
So tell us a bit about who you are, where you're from, the world that you grew up in.
So I am the child of sharecroppers. I'm from a family of 8 children, mother and a father, and we grew up on a farm. And this means that we never owned any of the land or the houses that we lived in. It was always someone else's property. And this kind of sharecropping, as you know, started after slavery ended. So African Americans did not all get the 40 acres and a mule. Most of us did not. And so those families who did not and who stayed there in the South on those old plantation sites or some of the farms, smaller farms in the area, we worked the land. And at the end of the year, at the end of the season, we would split the profits after all of the expenses were paid, usually to the white person who owned the property. Mm. So that's the way I grew up. I grew up with a mother with a high school education and a father who could not read and write. So it meant that half of the times when he would go to settle up the accounts at the end of the year, we don't know what that was like and would not allow any of us to go with him. So we know that more than likely there was never any kind of equality there. No, that those accounts were never right on our behalf. So that's what sharecropping is like. When during the summer, kids would go away sometimes to live with relatives in the north or someplace like that. No, for us, it meant working in the fields. And that's what we did during the summers. So for a very, very long time, I did not talk about the way I grew up. I did not talk about my origin story. I was ashamed of it, did not talk about it, did not share it with my friends, because people don't know when I say we grew up in poverty, people don't understand that. Even today, when I talk to other Black Americans and I say that I'm from a family that grew up in poverty, they just don't understand that. They tell me, oh, well, I didn't ever get everything I wanted either. I could not go and do certain things, and I could not go to certain concerts. Well, that's a new world to me. That is not what poverty is. Poverty is when you barely have enough to eat to feed the family, when your mother cooks certain foods over and over again. And we were probably healthier then than I am now, because we ate lots of beans, lots of those stable, those foods that go a long ways, that you can season easily. So that's how we grew up. That's what it was like to grow up as a sharecropper, where the nearest farm maybe is sometimes the nearest neighbor might be across the field from you. And we had that case. In one house that we lived in, we had a family across the field from us, but that family was not a sharecropping family. The father worked in a factory someplace and would come home on weekends. And that was the family in the neighborhood with a television. And we would sometimes go across the field, me and my brothers. I have 4 older brothers. Charles, McCoy, Earl, and Clifton are my older brothers. And they would take me sometimes with them to that neighbor's house in the evening. It was dark. And so we would watch something on television. That was amazing to see television shows. Now, we never got to see ourselves on television. It was much later in life that we had some Black television shows. So for Black Americans to see themselves at that time, this was sometimes on a Sunday night, we could watch the Ed Sullivan Show. And every once in a while on the Ed Sullivan Show, there was a Black performer, maybe a Sammy Davis Jr. or someone like that, that we would see on television. But otherwise, if we ever got away during the Mickey Mouse hour on an afternoon after school, when MICKEYMOUSE, that meant that we were only watching white kids. And it wasn't until later when we had other shows that we could see Black kids on television as well. But that's what poverty is. It means not getting a television until I was, I'm not sure, maybe 8th or ninth grade before we had television in the house, and not having a telephone in the house until I had already left home, had already finished high school. So when the home economics teacher would say something like, now, if you go out this weekend with a young man, make sure that you have $1 and a dime. So a dime so that you could go to a phone booth and call home if you needed to. Well, I've never had a telephone, so that didn't even apply to me. And $1, half the times I did not have $1. So one of the things that stand out to me is now when we get together for a school reunion, kids will say to me, or not kids anymore, but my classmates will say to me, well, I never knew I was poor when we were growing up. And I tell them, I knew I was poor all along. No one had to tell me. I knew that this wasn't the life I wanted. So, yes, there were some well-to-do families in the community. We were not one of those. And because my mother could sew, my clothes were always clean, and I had enough of them so that people did not know how poor we really were. And one of the things my mom used to do is we would buy a 25-pound bag of flour. And the bags at one time were designed so that you could use them for other purposes. I had dresses made out of flour bags that nobody knew because my mom could create something that looked nice out of that no one knew that that's what it was. So that's how I grew up. 4 older brothers that I just named. My first sister after me was Clarice. Her name is Elva Clarice White. My next sister was Lillian Jean, and a brother, and I got them out of order. My brother Milton was next, and then my sister Lillian Jean, who is the baby of the family. So that's who we were. So Sunday afternoons, we would have a Sunday dinner, going to church. Everybody would go to church on Sundays, if everybody could fit in the car. So it depends upon what years I'm talking about. My brothers, as they left home and moved to the city, meant that our lives became better. It meant that our clothing got a little better over the years. And then eventually my father stopped sharecropping because you really need your children in order to do to put in all the work needed on a farm. And as my brothers, who were the workers, the real workers in the house, my father and my brothers. Now, I think I worked hard, but they don't believe that I worked hard. I believe it. So as they began to move away to the city, then life changed. My brother, who went to the military, was able to get my parents a house with his VA loan. And so things began to change. I was the first one who left high school and went away to college. Now, going away to college meant that I took as many loans and grants as possible. And I went to an HBCU. So not as expensive as some of the state schools like North Carolina, Chapel Hill, or Duke, or some of those other really well-known schools that you hear about in North Carolina. I went to North Carolina Central University, located in Durham, North Carolina. So not that far from Duke, not really that far from Chapel Hill, but it was one of the HBCUs that had a law school. So we were one of the kind of elite HBCUs. So that's how I got an education. Went for 2 years, and even though I was going on loans and grants, my parents still could not afford just those incidentals that you need. So after 2 years, I stopped and I went away to Washington, D.C. with a girlfriend and her family. My mother did something that most people don't understand now. As soon as my brothers finished high school, she wanted them to leave because there were no jobs available in our hometown other than helping someone else in the fields. And she wanted more than that for them.
What was the hometown?
So the hometown is really Ahoskie, North Carolina. Now, we did not live in Ahoskie. We lived out on a farm. So we actually grew up in little communities like Hexalina. So Hexalina is just a crossroad. But when we would go shopping on Saturdays, we would go the 12 miles to Ahoskie, North Carolina, to get the flour, the sugar, those things that we did not produce on the farm. We always had a garden. My mother always did canning of fruits and vegetables so we could have it through the winter. And we had hogs that we could kill hogs in the fall of the year, preserve that meat through the winter. So that's the way you lived. And my mom encouraged my brothers to leave the farm as quickly as possible because she thought that the only thing that could happen to a black man without a job is that he could get into trouble. So she made it her job, it was her goal to send my brothers to relatives in the city. So one brother went to Boston. We didn't have relatives in Boston, but we had good friends who lived on a farm next to us at one point that we stayed in touch with. And so this brother, my oldest brother, Charlie, went to Boston, who still lives in Boston today, and went with neighbors to Boston. And they took care of him until he had a job. And that's the way it worked at that time. My next brother went to the military, McCoy. He was a career military person, so he was in the Army for over 20 years. He was the one who later on was able to buy the house for my parents. The next brother, Earl, got a job working at the shipyard in Newport News, Virginia. So relatively close to home, about 75 miles away, but able to come back often and to help the family in a real way, a hands-on kind of way, because he was earning wonderful money, working at a shipyard that's owned by the federal government, and not living that far away. So it made a difference when my brothers went away.
Ooh, that's a story.
Yes.
Man, one never knows.
Never know.
So you mentioned you went through high school. What was that like for you? Were you able to go during regular hours, or how did that work out for you?
So for me, being the first girl, yes, I went to high school regularly. I sometimes had perfect attendance through school, but my brothers cannot say that because it was important that my brothers worked on the farm to do all the work that had to be done. My father couldn't do it all by himself. So there were times of the year that my brothers had to take sometimes days off out of school at a time to make sure that the work was done. When the crops were ready for certain work to be done, you had to do it. And they then had to do that. At one point, though, my oldest brother, Charlie, drove a school bus. And that's driving the school bus brought in money. So his driving a school bus made such a difference that he did not have to take that many days off once he got that school bus license. So because he was bringing in the kind of money we needed for all kinds of family emergencies, and so that made a big difference in the house as well.
So it's sort of understood that all of the resources went to the family.
That's correct. That's correct. Now, my brothers did buy clothing, and they were some of the most well-dressed high school students in the high school when they were seniors and juniors and seniors in high school. And they had a flair for fashion and could take almost nothing and make something creative out of it. Could buy some RIT dye. I think it was RITZ at the time. I think that was the name of the dye. And they could dye their shirts a certain color, different from anybody else in the high school. And so they would do things like that, and they stood out. They were very, very handsome, and they were well liked, and lots of friends going through high school.
What was your parents' name?
My parents are Gladys and Charlie. So my father is really Charlie. He would really be Charlie the third, I think. And my brother is probably the fourth, and his son is probably the fifth. I think that's the way it goes. Yes.
So you say when you was a child, you knew you were poor.
Oh.
So in living that life of being an impoverished person, what did you aspire to be? What did you want to do from that place in life?
And so the black women that I saw, that I identified with, were my teachers. And they dressed nicely, they spoke well, and they drove nice cars. I thought that was it. So I wanted to be a school teacher. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to teach, but I thought high school. So I didn't know what the subject matter was going to be. But all of my teachers had also graduated from HBCUs. So that's historically black colleges and universities. So they had gone to school at Shaw University or St. Augustine University or some other universities, and most of them had gone to school right there in North Carolina. Had come from our community, people we knew. We knew the families. We had grown up in the same churches, and now they're back to teach us. So you do your best in school, because these people know you. They know your mother, your father, you know their parents. And so it was that kind of a tight-knit community when you talk about the churches and the schools. Our teachers were also active in our churches, the ones reading the announcements so beautifully on Sunday mornings, singing in the choirs, leading the choirs. Those were the teachers. So they were the leaders of the community. Lived in nicer houses, of course, than I ever lived in until I moved away from there. But those were my models. Those were my role models. The people that I wanted to dress like, to speak like, to look like. Those were my models. And I don't remember them saying anything to me that was so crucial or so dynamic that I remembered it for the rest of my life. I don't remember that. I remember going to school, taking their classes, and trying to learn everything I could possibly learn, slacking off at times like high school and elementary school students will do, but wanting to be a school teacher. And there was another school teacher who taught us from like the 4th grade to the 8th grade. His name was Wave Ruffin. Mr. Ruffin had gone to an HBCU as well, but he was kind of a different person in our community, never associated with anyone in the community. You would never see him at church. You would never see him outside of the school. I guess he would go away to Raleigh, to Norfolk, wherever to have fun, because we never saw him out and about in the community. But he instilled in us, started teaching us algebra when we were in the fifth grade. So this forward thinking person wanted us to be the best that we could be academically. He is the one that I remember when it comes to being your best, studying, giving back to the school in a way that he thought parents should be more involved in the school, and just knew the community in a way that no matter where you were in life, he wanted you to be the best that you could be. And those of us who were trying, who made great grades, he just helped us even more. Yeah. And the one time that we saw him away from his well, the path that his footprint in the community, the one time that we saw him out of that footprint was our first day of high school when we left the eighth grade. He came to make sure that we were okay.
Nice.
So yeah, so that was Wave Reffin.
That's a great one too. Mm-hmm. So you wanted to be a teacher. That was your first focus. So fast forward, where did you wind up ultimately making a life of?
Okay, so let me just tell you why it wasn't being a school teacher.
Okay.
When I went away to North Carolina Central University, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for the atmosphere. I had come from a place with a library that was probably no larger than the average living room today in a home here in Las Vegas. Probably maybe 500 books. I probably have as many books now that I own as in my high school library. So I went away to a college that had a library that's a whole building. Mm. So just to try to make the transition, I wasn't ready to make that transition. I was not mature enough. I made okay grades, but I didn't think I was mature enough. So when it was decided that, yeah, this is a little too much for the family to try to afford to keep me in college, I went away to Washington, D.C. and lived there for a couple of years, earning my own money, learning how to budget. Didn't really learn how to budget until many years after that, but trying to do the best I could. That was when I started growing up. And I got to see what life was really like. So when I left Washington, D.C., moved to California, Los Angeles, California, place I'd always wanted to live, I went back to school.
Give us a snap. What years are we talking about?
Okay. Oh, wow. Oh, you want my age now?
No, just the time period. Was it Nixon? Was it?
So I'll tell you. I graduated from high school in 1966. Went to Washington, D.C. in 68 and 69, moved to Los Angeles in 1970. So gives you an idea of the time frame there. So until I went back to school in California as a junior in college was the first time I'd ever had a teacher who was not a Black American. Had never been in an integrated setting to that point until I went to California. Washington, D.C. at the time was called Chocolate City, and it was. So I worked with white women at the telephone company in Washington, D.C., but my entire life outside of that was back in the Black community. But this time, a different kind of a Black community. It was a Black community where we could go out on a Saturday night and go to a little club in Georgetown and see Roberta Flack entertaining at the piano. So because the girlfriend that I went to live with in Washington, D.C. had an uncle who loved taking us out. His wife was always a little sickly, but now he had these two young women, another relative, I think that was one of their cousins, that could go out with him on a Saturday night and he could show the town. So we got to see Washington, D.C. in a different kind of light. We got to see Black entertainment that we had never seen before because I'm from Ahoskie, North Carolina. I had never seen that. Music in Ahoskie, North Carolina was music that we got on the radio later at night. The area radio station in and around Ahoskie played country music. We knew that that music wasn't the music that we wanted to hear. But later at night, we could get Nashville and Memphis radio stations. So we got to keep up with the Motown sound and everything else happening in the music world. We didn't know why we didn't like country music, but we knew that this was the music that we identified with. So that's how we heard the music and kept up with the music. And some of my brothers would buy a 45 record every once in a while, and we would play it on the stereo. So that's how we kept up with the music that was going on in our lives, in our world, in the Black world at the time. So finally in 1970, I moved to Los Angeles. A new world, brand new world. The friend that I had moved to Los Angeles with, we stayed in a friendship for probably a month and it was over.
Wow.
So I'm in Los Angeles and I don't know that many people, almost no one. And my parents never knew what I went through to stay in Los Angeles, to stay in school there, to keep the job that I had, and to send enough money home so that my sister, the next in line, could go to a junior college back in Ahoskie. So that's the way we did it. That's the way we did. They never knew how friendless I was for a little while there. And then, but I wanted to stay, did not want to come home, so never went home. Stayed in Los Angeles for 22 years. Did all kinds of different work. Met all kinds of people, but got my bachelor's degree. Worked, while I was getting that bachelor's degree, I worked for an accounting firm. During the day, I worked in the switchboard room. So, and when it wasn't busy, it meant that I could read my assignments. And I went to school at night, full-time at night. Worked full-time during the day, went to school full-time at night.
That's a lot of tenacity, what they call it.
Maybe.
Full-time this and full-time
That's correct.
That's a lot.
But because of school there, going to school at night, getting to know adults going back to school is the way that I learned the city and met wonderful friends. Wonderful friends who were all colors, all cultures. And this was my first time getting to know people who were just not Black Americans, but getting to know people because of the quality and the character of those people, and learning that I could get that now. I could have white friends as well as Black friends. So my job was with one of the big 8 CPA firms at the time. I was probably the first Black female there, and the 2 Black men who were some of the first there were accountants. They were actually CPAs.
So you stepped up that ladder. So you had the Los Angeles experience.
Yes.
And what made you transition are you arriving in Las Vegas from Los Angeles, or was there some places in between?
No. Spent 22 years in Los Angeles, worked many different jobs while I was there. But in 1992, the Rodney King riots let me know I wasn't that happy with my job, the current job I had, wasn't that happy with the personal relationship that I was in at the time. And then the riots started. And at that time, I was working in the office of the NAACP and was not that happy there at home. either. So I decided that this is a good time to leave. Had been to Las Vegas several times over the years and decided I would give that a try.
So what has the journey been like here?
Fabulous. Las Vegas was it for me. When I say that I wasn't ready to go to college right after high school, I didn't feel that I was mature enough. When I got to Las Vegas, it was one of the first times I felt that I'm ready, that everything clicked, that I took the time to decide, okay, what have you enjoyed enough to want to do? What about looking back over your life? Where did you have that pleasure in all the areas of life? The job that you wanted, the kind of friends that you want to hang out with, where was that? And I realized it was when I was in school. It was when I was at Cal State LA getting my bachelor's degree, finishing those last 2 years. So I said, I want to work some kind of a part-time job and I want to get a master's degree. That's what I need to do. I'm ready now for school. I'm mature enough. I'm ready to be in a classroom and learn to be an intellectual. Learn to do some of those, read some of those books that you hear about, and I'm ready. And I just had to decide, okay, is it going to be history? What history? Okay, so you want history. You're reading all of these books. You're getting to know all of these historical events and all of these things that have happened in the Black community over the years. What is Black history and Black studies? What is that? Women's history and women's studies. What is? I don't know the difference. So I started calling UNLV. And I met this professor in the history department. Her name was Joanne Goodwin. And Joanne started explaining to me what it means to study women's history, women's studies. And I said, well, what about Black history? Do you have Black history classes? She said, yes. We now have professors who are teaching Black history. She said there are also Black studies. And she began to tell me about the theories that you learn in Black studies and all of these books being read in Black history these days and women's history. And I enrolled at UNLV. And at first I said, I wonder at this age now if I can keep up with these students, these 21-year-old students and 22-year-old students in their master's program. Can I keep up? So I just took a couple of classes, just a couple of semesters, just to make sure. And at the time that I started back at UNLV, there must have been 10 other women, older, they called us non-traditional students at the time. There must have been 10 of us going back to school at the same time. It was like, wow, how did this happen? All of these women want to study history, and we're there at the same time in these classrooms with Joanne Goodwin talking about women's history, and these 20-year-old students and then us a little older discussing events from women's history and talking about it and sharing experiences. It was amazing. It was just a time in life that was so fulfilling. So I was able to get some help from the history department. I got a job right there in the history department, got most of my classes paid for. It was amazing. We started a dinner club. We would go out to dinner and talk about some of the things we were learning and got to know other wonderful students, not just women, but some of the male students as well in the history department. It was glorious. It was glorious. I found my place.
So in a nutshell, the rest was history.
The rest was history because the history department decided that they wanted people in Las Vegas collecting our history, doing something called oral history.
Which is how we met.
wanted wanted to teach us how to do it. We didn't know in Las Vegas how to do that. The Oral History Center was at UNR in Reno, and they did not have enough money because they were funded from the state legislature. They didn't have enough money to do all of the oral histories needed in Las Vegas. So we had Joanne Goodwin, and we had a professor who was the chair of the history department, Eugene Mooring, who decided we need to bring people in and we need to teach as many people who will learn it how to do oral history. So they got people from San Diego to come in and do workshops, seminars. They got people from UNR, oral history program, to come down here to teach us how to do it. And anybody could learn. Anybody who volunteered to take all the workshops and all of the seminars, you didn't get credit for them, but you didn't have to pay for them. You just had to put it into your schedule in your leisure time. And that's what we did. All of those women who had come back to school late in life, we all took those classes. We all took them. Joanne Goodwin took them. We were all females. None of the men would volunteer to learn oral history. All females. We took all the seminars, all the workshops. We learned everything we could. And then they decided that it's time for us to have an oral history program here, either in the history department or the library. And they had to have somebody to run that oral history research center. And after a while, we got that money together to start that oral history research center. And they needed somebody. And I got a phone call one day saying, "Don't you want to come and run the Oral History Research Center?" And I said, "Yes, I surely do."
We interviewed this brother for his other project. He has, let me wrap my mind around a little sharecropping girl
Yes.
who went to D.C.,
Yes.
who went to L.A.,
Uh-huh.
who decided to come to Las Vegas,
Yes.
and now is the head of the oral history, the new being relevant, but
The new oral history. I'm the first director.
there you go.
I'm the first director.
Now that's a journey right there.
It's a journey, and there's a one little segment of this journey that I didn't tell you. So after I finished my master's degree here, stayed around a couple of years and took some other classes that I didn't need, but we got more and more professors teaching Black history. So I took additional classes. And then someone said to me one day, "Claytee, why don't you go and get a PhD?
Uh-oh.
That's what you should do. Get a PhD." So I applied to a couple of PhD programs, and I said, if I am accepted, I was accepted at 3 programs. I said, if I'm accepted at the College of William and Mary, that's where I'm going because it's only about 75 miles from my hometown. It is time for me to go back and check on my mom, make sure everything is okay. So because by that time we had all left home. So I got accepted at William and Mary. Went back to William and Mary to work on a PhD. Did all of the classroom work, but never finished the dissertation. So I'm one of those hundreds of millions of people who are ABD. I have everything except the dissertation done. So I moved in with my mom back in Powellsville, North Carolina. It's about 5 miles from Ahoskie. It is the place where, when my brother was able to build a house for my parents, they built it in this little community called Powellsville, North Carolina. It's where my high school had been located. So when I got there, I discovered that my mom really needed one of her daughters. So as soon as I finished my classroom work at William and Mary, I went back and forth often from William and Mary to Powellsville. But as soon as I finished, I moved in with my mom. And for my mom's last 2.5 years on this earth, I lived with her. She was not ill. We just had a good time together. We would go to church together. I was there to drive her around. She didn't have to depend on anyone. And when my mom passed away, about 2 weeks later, maybe a month later, I got a call from UNLV saying, "Would you like to come back to apply to be the new director of our Oral History Research Center. We finally gotten the money together and we can start a center. And that's how I got back.
All right.
Yes.
We're the beneficiary.
Yes, I am, and you are.
Yes,
Yes,
indeed.
but I am, because I never thought I could create the kind of career that I've created.
Well, look, that is a great origin story and journey. So we're gonna take a little pause right here.
Okay.
I'm like, it's hard for me to not say stuff. Like, I'm cheering for you, and I'm trying to not to. Woo, I've known you some years now.
Yes.
Who knew?
No one knew, because I never told my story. I was always too busy collecting everyone else's stories.
Yeah, I was telling Gail, like, I know Claytee has the collection, because you got, and you become that part of this community. Anyone who has a good story, you need to go talk to Claytee.
Yeah.
We just know that.
Yes.
And we know that you're going to honor it and do the right thing with it.
Yes.
So we got another section or so.
Good.
And that was fascinating. I'm like, I got goosebumps. Wow. Yeah, that was great.
Good. Okay. So that's my life.
Wow. Yo, that's a keeper right there.
Okay.
Next is just going to be a couple of things.
Okay.
You kind of hit on the mother wit.
Yes.
And was there anyone else that you wanted to add to that, another person, or about the mother wit portion of your life? Who did you take some pearls away with?
So one of those people along the way who gave me some pearls of wisdom was Joanne Goodwin. Even though I'm older than Joanne taught me how to be a student. She taught me she probably taught me critical thinking, using my life experiences, using what she knew that I had learned in the classrooms in the history department at UNLV, and using my oral histories that I had collected. She was the one who helped me put it all together in a way that I could think about it and use it. So, and teaching me how to write from there, using my life experiences along the way. So she was probably more of a mentor, probably, than anyone else as an adult. And I don't remember that many other mentors, really.
So the flip side of that for us, then, is I always like to ask, as a fully formed person as you are, say a young person comes behind you, what couple of pieces of knowledge, what pearls would you say, apply this to your life and you'll be okay?
One of the things I tell them is to travel, and I tell them to learn to use their intuition. Learn to be spiritual enough. I'm not talking about religious and going to church every Sunday. I'm not talking about that. I try to tell young people to connect with their spiritual side enough so that they can talk to the invisible and communicate with the invisible in a way that they can lean on that intuition, that voice that comes from within sometimes that we don't want to pay any attention to learn to pay attention. That's my major thing that I tell young people, and I want them to travel. I don't think there's anything any more valuable than going to the continent and then going to Europe and Asia and some other places. Go to the continent first. Learn from the continent and then start traveling other places. Our students on campus have money in a lot of cases that they use for all kinds of purposes. I see some of the latest fashions on campus, and I have nothing against that. I love fashion myself. I want our students to learn to have some flair about yourself so you don't have to buy every new outfit. Buy one here or there and make it your own. Make some fashion your own. so that you can put away some of that money that you're spending on everything and start traveling. Instead of spring break going to Florida, go to Ghana. Might take cost a few pennies more, but go to South Africa, go to Kenya, and then from there start traveling in Asia and Europe and Canada and Mexico and South America. But start with the continent. Start getting to know yourself. When I went to Ghana and I went into the slave castles on the coast of Ghana, where my ancestors had been housed before they got on the ships. And we were walking through those catacombs and those basements under those castles. And the docent said, right now you're standing on the excrements of your ancestors. And this is the menstrual blood. This is the defecation. This is the urination of your ancestors that we are walking on right now. And then they told us how they were kept in those areas before being chained down on the ships to be sent to America. So we need to see that. We need to go there. We need to know our history. There are many places in Africa that I have not seen, and it is my goal to go to more of those places, to learn more of that history, and to teach it. To teach it, as I'm talking about Blacks in Las Vegas, I've expanded that. I talk about Black history here in this country. I bring in Ghana whenever I can. So I have just enlarged what I talk about.
Hearing you talk, it makes some of these questions seem so insignificant.
We need to know ourselves, and we don't.
And
Yeah, and I know about the trauma. We go through trauma. When I talk about now, we have a series at UNLV called "We Need to Talk." We started it after George Floyd's murder, and we talk about systemic racism, what it is, and how it operates, and why Black Americans are where we are today, where Latinx people are where they are today. We talk about all of the non-white communities. But we first went through all of systemic racism. We talked about healthcare, police brutality, education, employment, banking, housing. We've talked about every aspect of systemic racism and what it has done to Black Americans. And that's why we continued. And we talked about Latinx, and we talked about Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders. The next conversation in We Need to Talk is about the East Side. So we talk about all of that because we don't know enough. We don't know ourselves. We don't understand trauma. We don't understand how that trauma has been passed from those ships to where we are right now. And we don't understand what it means when someone has their house appraised today. And if your house is decorated with Black images, that it might not appraise the same as a house with all white American images. And we have examples from these years right here where someone's house has been de-blacked. You've taken all your Black family pictures out of the house, and you've taken your Black child out of the house, And this woman in Florida left her black husband in the house. And this time the appraiser comes and appraises the home at $100,000 more after they have taken the house, all of their decorations out of the house. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm talking about. That's why we need to talk. We need to talk. And for blacks to have gone to jail during the methamphetamine crisis and the crack epidemic, for us to have gone to jail and not got the treatment that we needed, that people are getting now during the opioid crisis. Right. Yes. So white people are going to hospitals and treatment centers, and our black men and women went to jail. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about systemic racism. We've got to do better. We've got to learn our history, and we've got to live better. We've got to live better. People are afraid of what we can do. When I talk about our trauma and where we are anyway, do you know where we would be without that trauma? They cannot allow us to live without this trauma, because we would take over the world. Yeah. We would actually take over the world if just given equality and equity. That's all we need.
America is always looking for the great white hope. And like everything we touch, the list goes on of the sports and the sciences and the
astronauts and everything else, everything we touch.
So it's you preaching to the choir. This is far more than I could have hoped for this show.
But this is what we need to talk about.
Yes.
Yes. And we need to tell these stories. I'm so happy that you are doing these conversations. We need to tell these stories.
If I may, that we are doing these conversations.
Okay, good. I will accept that. We are doing these conversations.
This is the work.
This is the work.
This is the work that I feel that we need to do.
We need to tell the next generations. I don't care where you are right now. I don't care if you're in a jail cell. I don't care where you are. I don't care if you are at a federal housing community, because this is all you can do right now. You live in one of those projects. It's okay. It's okay, because we got your back, and we can do better. We can help each other do better. Mm-hmm.
So, Claytee White, Ms. Claytee White, that's my conversation for today. I like I said, you nailed it. It's like anything else that I wouldn't even thought to say, that pale in comparison to what you've shared. And I'm very grateful that you are here and that you're here for us.
And I am grateful to be here. I'm at that point in my life that I am thinking about my next step. I don't know what that's going to be yet, but I'm thinking. I'm reading. I'm discovering new things about life and some of the things that I want to do. So I want to end by telling you something that I probably shouldn't share, but I'm going to share it anyway. So I have never been married. I never wanted to get married. I never wanted children. And just last week, I have started a relationship that I am giving the time to be the kind of relationship that I want in my life. So it is a long distance relationship, but I am ready. I'm ready to spend some quality time with special people and with a special person, and to do some writing. One of the things I want to do some writing.
That's the next journey. Thank you. This has been Conversations, the journey. Thank you very much. We'll be back the next time with the next conversation. I'm host Ellis Rice. Thank you very much. Peace.
Thank you so much.
Wow.